Hey everybody, thank you for joining me on another episode of the podcast. My name is Daniel. Daniel teaches. I'm the psychology student who brings you his 2 cents from his lectures, his notes, and sometimes the current events. Let's talk about what's going on in Canada right now, the Freedom Convoy protest, so we can understand a little bit more about what a protest is and how a protest comes about. Now, firstly, I want to say thank you to you again for listening to me, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I appreciate your support. So in order to understand a protest, psychologically, what a protest is, what leads people to protest, it's easy to start with the micro and work ourselves to the macro. When you are an infant, when you're 6 months old, a year old, what do you do to get mom and dad's attention, right? First of all, why do you need mom and dad's attention? Your needs are not being met. There is something that you need that you can't get yourself, and you need someone else to help you get that thing. It might be food, it might be a toy, it might be going to the bathroom. So what do? You cry and you might throw something. You do anything at your disposal that a 1-year-old can do to get mom and dad's attention. If you could do it yourself, well then you do, but you can't. So you need their support. So you protest. We see the exact same thing in adults. You take an individual who wants something, for example, or doesn't want something in this case. Let's say you don't want vaccine mandates. But you can't do it without mom and dad's support, mom and dad being the government. So you make noise and you yell and you shout and you throw and you do everything in your possibility to get the government to help you fulfill your needs or fulfill your wishes or your desires. And what happens is when you take one individual from a different personality, with a different background, with different experience, with different religious affiliation, different political affiliation, they can all bond over that same issue. And that's why you see there's so many people from different ethnicities in this Freedom Convoy in Canada right now. They're white people, they're black people, they're brown people. I've seen Asian people, Korean, Chinese, Japanese. I've seen African people. I've seen a lot of immigrants from Europe. Like I've seen people from, I saw a few interviews. There was a lady from the Ukraine that was there. There was a guy from Poland that was there. So it's a very diverse crowd. I also saw a Nazi flag there. I also saw a Confederate flag there. So what we do when we protest is essentially our needs are not being met, or something that we believe we should have we're not given, so then we vocalize it, right? We want people to notice us. We want you to notice that there's something wrong. So what happens? Me and you have the same idea. We both go out into the street and we start vocalizing our opinions. Oh, and it turns out Bill from down the street, he also thinks like we do. So he joins us. All of a sudden, now there's a lot of people and we're all together and we're all vocalizing our opinions. Now here's what happens. 2 people can look at a protest, and if you are for it, you will see the good things, and if you are not for it, you will see the bad things. For example, I want to take you back a few years ago. A gentleman by the name of George Floyd is basically, I don't think it's wrong to say that he was murdered on camera. He wasn't murdered, but it was pretty bad. Basically. I mean, I don't think that's a exaggeration to say, right? A police officer behaved unethically, and that led to the BLM movement. The people who supported BLM movement and the protests and the riots, what did they say? This is a rise and a pushback against police brutality, against systematic racism that has plagued not only the country of America, but many other countries for a long time. And even though we have laws that do not promote racism, there's still people who are corrupt. And the problem is that those corrupt people are at the top of these institutions, making it institutionalized racism or systemic racism. It's one thing if you're racist by yourself. It's another thing when you're the CEO of a company and you're racist. The people who didn't support that movement, guess what they did? Guess what they talked about? They focused on the people in those protests who were not being peaceful. The people who were rioting, the people who were lighting a Starbucks on fire, the people who were breaking into cars, the people who were beating up police officers. And they said, this protest is full of people who are gang members, drug dealers, drug users, thieves, and looters. If you support the BLM protest, you are supporting these people who are vandalizing your town and your city. And you're not a true American, or you're not a true Canadian. You are supporting these gang members, you're supporting violence, you are supporting theft, and that's who you are. If you support BLM. That was one narrative. Now we look at this convoy protest. And in one sense, the people who are for it go, look, you're infringing on my rights. My body, my choice. You don't have a right to put a needle in my arm without my consent. Why do I have to show you a piece of paper before I go into a grocery store? This is ridiculous, right? This is some people's opinion. So they go out and they march and they say, look, this isn't a march for racism, for sexism, for homophobia, for fat food. No, this is about the vaccine mandate. And the people who don't like the protest, what do? You look at one guy holding up a Nazi flag or one guy who was a known like fascist, and you say, everybody who's supporting the protest is a fascist. Everybody who's supporting the protest is a racist or a white supremacist. Now this puts you in a weird position, because what if you're like, well, Daniel, I support the protest. I don't like vaccine mandates, but I'm not a racist. It's like, but you are in association with someone who is racist. What does that say about us? You're willing to protest with someone, let's say, who is openly racist, but the discussion is not race. So you might say, Daniel, that's irrelevant. We're here protesting vaccine mandates. That guy just happens to be racist. Is this issue of vaccine mandates so important to you that the fact that, let's say he is racist or a white supremacist, is second to that you want to come together and focus on abolishing vaccine mandates? You might say, Daniel, I don't care. I don't care that you're not a racist person. If you support that convoy protest, if you are supporting those people and you know that it's in association with people who are racist, if you continue to support it, then you are no better than they are. That's one opinion. But that would be like me saying, if you supported the BLM riots, if you were out there protesting and you knew that some people were looting and thieving and breaking into cars and lighting buildings on fire, that you are supporting that. You were supporting the vandalization of cities. What do you do now? Because I've put you in a very weird position. If you are against vaccine mandates, if you are out there protesting, you're either racist, or B, if you're not racist, you're not any better than a racist person because you're protesting with them. It's like, that's one way to look at it. Well, would you say that everybody who was supporting Black Lives Matter was no better than the people who were thieving and robbing and breaking and looting into places? Do you see how we can flip the narrative? Like if you supported BLM, you go, no man, it's different, it's not like that. But for the convoy, yeah, absolutely it is like that. So what we do is the good things we attribute to ourselves and the bad things we tend to attribute to other people, right? If I was a BLM supporter, that doesn't mean that I'm supported the looting and the thieving and beating up police officers. But if you support this protest in Canada, then you are supporting white supremacy and racism and all that stuff. Do you see how that happens, folks? And I'm not saying I have the answer. I don't want my opinion to change the way you think, but I want you to understand that we can look at the same situation of riots. And if you don't like the riot, you will focus on confirmation bias. If you don't like the riot, you will focus on the thing that makes your confirmation come true. I saw one guy holding up a Nazi flag, therefore, if you support the convoy, you're supporting Nazis. That's one narrative. So how do you reconcile something like that? Imagine your buddy calls you over and he says, Daniel, I would love to celebrate Sarah, Sally, Amanda, John, Rick, Sahil. Come over to my place. I just donated $100,000 to a children's foundation. You're going, oh my God, that's amazing. That's amazing, $100,000. And as you go to give your buddy a high five, you remember that he's the one who beat his dog. Like there was video of him beating up his dog and they had to take his dog away from him. And he's a known animal abuser. So all of a sudden, mid-high five, you're going, hey, well, wow, $100,000 is a lot of money. But you're also going, this man abused his dog several times. Does one trump the other? right? So do you sit there and go, you know what, I supported BLM because yes, even though there was things that I didn't agree with, I liked the overall message of systemic racism in the police system that needs to be dealt with. If so, can we use that same logic here and say, you know what, look, I don't agree with everybody at the Freedom Protest Convoy. I don't agree with white supremacy or racism or sexism or any of that stuff, but I support the overall message. And maybe that's enough for me to go out and protest. My worry is that when we don't want to deal with people, we throw labels on them, right? If someone was to tell you, hey, I support the freedom protest, the easy thing to do is go, well, you're racist. And I don't know where this comes from. I don't know if it's an emotional thing or it's a lack of self-control, but there's this lack of wanting to understand. There's this lack of curiosity, folks, that I think is detrimental to us. I really think it is. I think when people support something that we do not support, we often approach it with anger, with disgust, with resentment, rather than curiosity. My thoughts on the vaccine mandate are irrelevant, whether I'm for it or against it, whether I'm for this protest happening in Canada or against that, that doesn't matter. What matters is that I believe in peaceful protest. And protesting is never a problem. Protests are a symptom of the problem. Because if there's enough people protesting on the street, something's not going well. Like there's something wrong here. Now, it's your decision. Now, that doesn't mean anybody who protests is right, and you got to agree with everything that they say all the time. But I think it's important to consider that. And if your response to a protest is, I'm just going to shut it down, or have them all arrested, or call them names, the problem with that is that's going to go one or two ways. Either one, those people are going to get bitter, and they might stop protesting publicly, and they'll continue to protest privately. They'll make Facebook groups. They'll talk to each other. They'll make GoFundMe campaigns. And that's going to be an obstacle for the next election. Or the opposite happens. You tell people to go home and they protest even harder, and protests get violent. Because if I'm trying to get your attention in a peaceful manner, and you start calling me names, and you start provoking me, there's a chance that I have to escalate my means of grabbing your attention. You want to call your girlfriend or boyfriend over, you might say, hey babe. They don't come, hey babe, hey Amanda. Hey Amanda. Like by the fifth time, it sounds like you're a military sergeant and you're calling Amanda over because she didn't like clean up her equipment. Right? So even when we call someone, it goes so quick from hi honey to John, I've been calling you for 5 days. Like it changes, which is totally normal. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. So there is a chance, and I hope this doesn't happen, that the individuals in the protest, they don't feel heard, and then things get violent. Because we don't want to see that. Right? We want to live in a country where people are free to protest and to voice their opinions. That doesn't mean we have to agree, but we should always seek to understand. We should always seek to understand. And don't get me wrong, seek to understand doesn't mean justifying it. It doesn't mean giving it an excuse. It doesn't mean someone shoots up a school, you go, oh, well, he had a tough life. No. I'm not justifying it. But I believe that it only does us a disservice to throw a label on what we do not understand. You see the world differently than I do. You see the world so differently from so many other people on religious topics, on political topics, topics of relation to affordable housing. And you have to understand that those people who are out there protesting, whether it be for BLM, whether it be for abortion, whether it be for vaccine mandates, deep down, they believe they're doing the right thing. They believe they are standing up for what is right. And even if I don't agree with it, I can understand where you're coming from. And I admire your boldness and your courage to stand up against something that you perceive to be wrong. Now, the interesting thing is I might not perceive it to be wrong. So let's have a discussion. Because if we don't discuss this, if this issue is not addressed, it will be swept up under a carpet and it will begin to boil and it'll begin to build. And as this thing builds up, all of a sudden, let's say Liberal leader Justin Trudeau doesn't win the next election, right? Or just there won't be Liberal. And they might not be NDP either. And they might not be Green either. It'll be maybe Conservative. I know it's a little soon for the People's Party of Canada, but what I mean to say is when we feel like we're going too much in one direction, balance will work itself out and the pendulum will swing the other way. Right? People are going to end up bitter one way or another. When you put out vaccine mandates, there's no way to make everybody happy. Right? When you take down all restrictions, there's going to be people upset. When you keep restrictions up, there's going to be people upset. Right? It's part of the game. It's how we're going to learn to operate. It's how we have operated all these years. But I almost sound like I bring this up every 3 or 4 episodes, but compassion. I think it's so overlooked. Compassion, kindness, looking out for one another. You know, the problem is when you label someone as a racist or a fascist or a thug or a drug dealer or a drug addict, you're nothing but a drug addicted racist guy. It's like, well, what did you just do, man? You just collectively took a group of people and just put a label on them as if they're all the same, but they're not all the same. They have different experiences, different personalities, different religious affiliation, political affiliation, different upbringing, different ethnicity, different skin color. Right? Me saying those are just a bunch of racists is no different from me saying, hey, you know, check out that blonde over there. That's very different than saying, check out that girl with blonde hair. Look at that disabled guy. It's very different than saying, look at that guy who has a disability. Right? Because what we do is we intertwine the ideology with the individual. And when we do that, it becomes easier to attack the ideology. It becomes easier to attack the individual. We are no different from when we go to war. Imagine if the military sergeant right before going to war said, hey, these are the pictures of the kids that you're going to be killing. Look, this is 18-year-old Brad. This is 19-year-old Stan. This is his girlfriend. These are his parents. He's hoping to go home if he makes it, if you don't kill him. If you do a bad job, he's probably going to go home after this war. He's going to go back to school. He lives on a farm. Like, they don't do that, right? What do? You call them the enemy, and that's it. You don't get into their personality. You don't get into their upbringing. You don't get into their experiences. And my worry is when we label people as, oh, you're just a drug-addicted racist. Like, what does that mean, dude? You're completely overlooking him as an individual, as opposed to this is an individual, a human being, just like me, who's standing up for what he believes in, just like me, who has racist beliefs that are harmful. That is so different than saying that as a racist person. That is so different than saying they're drug addicted. That is a person struggling with drug issues. And the reason you separate them is because you go, look, they don't have to struggle with drug issues all their life. A racist person doesn't have to be racist all their life. That is a human being with a racist thought. Thoughts can be changed. Beliefs can be changed. They do change all the time. But if we combine the two, it makes it easier to attack the individual. And I believe when we put people in a collectivistic ideal, and we throw a label on them, it actually pushes people further away because it completely neglects your unique personality and your unique experiences as a human being. So next time you turn on the news and you're listening to a protest or some political party leader who's talking about something that you don't agree with, you don't have to agree, but be careful. Whenever you hear something like, do you know what the problem with women is? Do you know what the problem with liberals are, with conservatives? Do you know what the problem with these truckers are? What does that mean? What do you mean truckers? What do you mean liberals? What do you mean women? Are you speaking about the cashier at the grocery store, or are you speaking about my mother? Right? So there's differences in the individual. And when we don't highlight those differences, that's when we see problems start to arise. So be mindful, folks. Be mindful. Look at the individual. Remember, everybody's got their own unique personality. Again, this doesn't mean everybody's right. This doesn't mean you should be blind and naive and everybody's doing the right thing. It's actually saying be skeptical. Be skeptical about everything. Don't be paranoid, but ask questions. Think for yourself. Go, why are they out there protesting? For what? Interesting. If I was in his place, if I grew up and my parents were like his parents, I'd probably be out there protesting too. What is the best way to approach this? And when you think like that, I promise you it'll be better for everybody involved. That's it for this episode, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Daniel. I appreciate you. I will be back next week. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.